8:13 now at News Talk 96.5 KPEL. We continue our trip through all the candidates for the races we're going to talk about this year in November. We go back to the polls with a congressional race in the 3rd District. Mimi Methvin throwing her hat in the race. She joins us here this morning. How are you? Good to meet you.
Good morning. Good to meet you, and thanks for having me.
So we love just to kind of make the rounds and have we'll have more intense interviews once we get closer to November, because we get to hear more about people's position, and the criticism will be a part of it, as it is in politics all the time, between candidates and ads and everything else. But we kind of wanted to get to know you, let our listeners get to know you on your website, votemimi.org. 28 years as a judge, federal and state. You're a mom, you're an attorney, mediator, to Tulane, Georgetown, former U.S. attorney. Lots of different things. How does all that combine to prepare you for this job?
Well, and let me just make one correction. I was an assistant U.S. attorney, not U.S. attorney, but the way it combines is that I worked for all 3 branches of the government. And so going to Washington, I'm going to be armed with an understanding not only of how laws are written and the process of doing that in the legislature, in Congress, but also what happens when laws are not adequately drafted, and the struggle that judges sometimes have with interpreting the laws and understanding the legislative intent. And then I also understand the challenges in the executive branch. I worked in both the Department of Justice as an assistant U.S. attorney and for the Department of Interior for 2 years. I worked in Appalachia, basically enforcing or trying to enforce with our agency the regulations that apply to strip mining of coal. And that allowed me to see some of the challenges of, in particular, having a situation of a fox in the henhouse, someone in charge of an agency that is hostile to the mission of the agency. And so I've been able to actually live through a lot of the situations that apply to a congressperson trying to get laws passed and be effective for their constituents.
So as much as you deal with things in Washington, you're a representative for the people here. You talk about coal in Appalachia. Here it's oil and gas. Very similar situations when it comes to regulations, when it comes to safety concerns, when it comes to environmental concerns. And you see these issues kind of be a political football between the back and forth when it's politicians and not regulators or actual folks working with the law, specifically as you had. How do you break through that? It's a huge oil and gas community here that we have as far as jobs and economy goes. How does that play into the role and what you would do as in Congress? That's
a great question, and I think you all may have seen something that I posted because I was in Delcom last Thursday.
Yeah, we have an email about it.
So we were talking to citizens in Delcom and a number of people who actually have been on the front lines of this issue, head of the levee board, members of the parish council, just citizens who have been interested in and are on the front lines actually being affected by the coastal problems that we're having. As you know, we've lost 2,000 square miles of our coast since 1930. And we're on track to lose another 2,000 square miles in the next 50 years. So people who have kids and grandkids, these kids are going to be living through loss of a tremendous amount of land. And the 3rd Congressional District, as you know, goes from the Texas coast all the way through Morgan City, Franklin, and this is a coastal community. So what we're seeing, of course, there's not just one cause of what we're experiencing, but sea level rise and subsidence and the more frequent and intense storms that we're having. But the oil and gas business has had a big effect on saltwater intrusion. So all of those canals that were dug, most of them done with permits, and my understanding is most of those permits did require mitigation after those were no longer being used. It required that some restoration of the marsh be done. And for the most part, there's been very weak enforcement of those requirements. Right now, we have coastal lawsuits against a lot of the majors. Some of the folks in Delcom spoke about that. They spent their lives, 30 years, working for major oil and gas exploration companies. And they see, the terrible flooding issues, they've got a ballpark in Delcom, which on sunny days often gets flooded by tidal waters coming in. And they're trying to figure out how to protect that ball field so that the kids can play. So my approach is, this is complicated. We need to address it. We need to listen to the people that are on the front lines and actually do something to empower ourselves, Louisiana, to battle this. We're on the front lines. We can learn, innovate, and export what we're finding out here to other cities in the United States and around the world, where this is a global challenge.
So what obviously you're talking to people, you were in Delcom, you talked to people there that think the lawsuits like you talked about, the pending lawsuits, especially against the oil companies, could be, not saying it's the only thing, but could be the reason that the oil companies are not doing business here.
No, that is not what I understood. What I understood is this one gentleman that spoke spent his life working for the oil business, and then what he sees is they have left Louisiana and left us holding the bag. We're now dealing with massive problems, and they are fighting tooth and nail, paying lawyers millions of dollars to avoid stepping up and helping us with the problem that they helped cause. Nobody is saying oil and gas companies are alone responsible for what's going on. It is a complex problem. The fact that we have levied the Mississippi and, in order to protect communities from flooding, that we know has stopped the regular sedimentation that counteracts the subsidence problems. So it's not just one thing. But if we have a coastal master plan that calls for $50 billion, we're far from having that amount of money for our coastal master plan. What I'm calling for is fully funding that coastal master plan and doing more, because we know that even if it is funded, we're still going to lose massive amounts of land in the 3rd Congressional District on the coast. So I'm calling for $100 billion over 50 years. That's going to produce 212,000 new jobs, $7 billion in earnings. And one thing that resonated with folks in Delcom.
And just so we're clear, what is the $100 million? Where is it coming from?
So $100 billion.
The $100 billion. Where's it coming from?
That's going to come from the federal government. That's what I'm asking. We just gave a massive $1 trillion tax cut to the wealthiest corporations and businesses, and that needs to be addressed. I'm all for tax cuts for working families and for ordinary Americans, but this constant transfer of wealth in the United States to the 1%, to corporations who are already massively wealthy, is undermining our ability to fund infrastructure programs and to fund education, to really restore the middle class. Our policies in Washington have not been serving average people. And let me add here, if I can, that one of the biggest problems we have is that our elected representatives are corporate owned for the most part. That our campaign finance laws require us to find lots and lots of money to run, and it's the first people that step up are corporations and PACs.
Let me ask you about you're running for the seat that's currently held by Clay Higgins, who's running for re-election, who had tremendous popularity in this area. Just people knew him from Crime Stoppers, people knew him from different things as well. How do you combat that excitement from someone who doesn't know you as a judge, who doesn't know you from previous public office, hourly public office where you're running a campaign like this?
Sure. Well,
because you are running as a Democrat, and obviously he's the Republican.
Right. And there are a total of 8 people in the race right now, and we all have the same challenge, which is to get out and introduce ourselves to the voters and get that name recognition. And that's what my commitment is, to get out and talk to folks. But we have to remember that the incumbent was elected with 16% of the registered voters in the district. It's not that there's tremendous excitement about any particular candidate. It is that we are basically a non-voting state. And that is what, more than getting my name out, it's energizing people to understand there is a choice. There are other people that we can consider and send to Congress.
We do need to start to wrap up for time. We're joined by Mimi Methvin. We'll end on your top priority. What is your top priority?
Well, I hate to put them on par, but fighting this coastal issue is our top priority. I don't think any other congressional district in the country has more of a crisis on hand than we in the 3rd Congressional District with our coastal land loss. And I was stunned to learn in Delcom how frustrated our people are because politicians are not talking about these issues. They're not talking to people. They're talking to petrochemical companies and oil and gas companies, the outfits that have lobbyists. They get the ear of our representatives, but the average folks out there that are on the front lines dealing with these coastal issues, with flooding, they're the ones that are frustrated. And I think advocating for the people of Louisiana in this way is going to be my top priority.
All right, Mimi Methvin, running for the 3rd District, the seat currently held, 3rd Congressional District, seat currently held by Clay Higgins. We'll be talking to you in the coming months. November is just around the corner.
It sure is.
So plenty of issues and debates and everything to be had still to come. 8:22, appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, we're coming up on a quick break here. We're going to be joined here in a few minutes, Derek Albert.